Well, welcome everyone. Welcome, welcome. You have gotten yourself hooked into the Cerberus Radio Network this morning, and lo and behold, you're sitting right across from Gregory Junkbond Carpenter, the spy who loves liberty. Jeff, did you have a chance to look at that meme I sent you yet? I sent Jeff a very important meme about defending America.
Yes.
Now you understand how difficult this is.
Because I can't even compose myself at the moment.
Fair enough. So with that, with Jeff falling all to pieces, it does kind of set the stage for what we're going to speak of today, which is we're going to talk about the life and times of one notorious Harry J. Anslinger and what he did to America. I'm sorry, I'm cracking up too because that kind of does say it all, doesn't it, Jeff? Come on, Jeff, you can do it. Come on back.
I'm sorry, you're catching me doing my producer stuff. I'm making sure we are streaming live on Radio Co. So if you want to listen out there, folks, we're live on the radio.
There you go. That's usually Suzanne's job, but I don't know where the heck we broadcast everything. We're on YouTube. We got the Facebook links up. We're on Radio Co. We're once around the block and back over again. So let's talk about Harry Anslinger today because he's a very interesting little character. He is what you would call the J. Edgar Hoover of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. Now, he served in the role as the commissioner for 32 years, from 1930 to 1962, almost as long as J. Edgar Hoover was controlling the Federal Bureau of Intimidation, which is a very, very long time. Anslinger grew up, normal kid, normal life, and he became prominent in private industry when working as an investigator for the Pennsylvania Railroad. He did an investigation that found that a claim filed by a widower of a railroad for $50,000 was fraudulent. Imagine that, people filing fraudulent claims 100 years ago. So what happened then? He went to other military and police organizations, worked his way up, and then was appointed by Andrew Mellon to the position at the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. Now, Andrew Mellon, of course, was his wife's uncle. So it wasn't like it was, something different. Oh, that's right. Yes. Member of the Mellon family from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, relative of all the other Mellons with big money. Not like the Rodney Dangerfield Mellon in Back to School. Let's draw that line of distinction, please. Anslinger started a campaign against marijuana. And interestingly enough, there was a reason he did it, and he felt that people were out of control. Now, the federal government at that time was looking to ban marijuana, and Anslinger was the perfect guy to do it. But this started way, way, way back, years before. We hear that the federal government was involved as of 1934, and this is true to an extent. But even before that, cannabis, which was used for most times medicinal purposes, used to be called Indian hemp. And it started to be restricted in some state and local laws. Specifically, in 1860 in New York was the first local law that I came across that actually banned, quote, Indian hemp. It was called Cannabis Indica. Now, several other states followed along, and mostly local jurisdictions followed along. By the 10s and the 20s, there were several jurisdictions that were banning the sale of cannabis. It was in 1906 when the federal government fired up the Pure Food and Drug Act, and that regulated the labeling of patient medications that contained cannabis indica. And in 1925, the U.S. supported the regulation of this cannabis as use as a drug. Where? At the International Opium Convention. Did you ever think we'd have one of those out there? That's just amazing, isn't it? An International Opium Convention. And it was geared on limiting the sale and distribution of opium. So, why was marijuana brought up at this convention? Well, we had to get other people thinking about it, didn't we? Mm-hmm. And what came out of there? Well, it was a suggestion from the International Opium Convention attendees, which set the stage for the Uniform State Narcotic Act. The what? I never heard of that, Greg. Yeah, that was the act that built and was formed by the states, which was the predecessor of the 1934 Act that the federal government imposed. It was basically, it was I keep saying 1934, I mean 1937. Doggone it. So don't don't believe everything you hear on the radio, folks. So in this time, the states had gotten together and said, okay, we agree upon amongst ourselves that we want to do something. And it took another 4 or 5 years, and the federal government became involved because there was a majority of states telling the federal government that they wanted them to do this for them. In the same way that there was uniform immigration laws back in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, which stuck and became the standard for today on how the federal government does immigration, this was done with marijuana also. Now, the interesting part was there was no amendment to the Constitution, either in immigration or in marijuana, but it somehow became, quote, federal law. Well, how did this happen? Again, we go back to the lobbying by the states for the federal government to implement some type of a law that made it uniform for the states, even though the states had every right to do something that was uniform for themselves and not involve the federal government in this manner. They did. So you see, folks, even then, we already knew that the federal monstrosity was way too big. Way too big. So let's go back a little bit to 1930 for a little bit here. And it was just prior to the end of alcohol prohibition when the campaign against marijuana really kicked into high gear. Anslinger claimed that he had claimed cannabis was not a problem and that it didn't harm people. To that claim, he said, quote, "There is no more absurd fallacy." What? Oh, that's right. He put together a propaganda campaign more powerful than almost any other propaganda campaign ever, as far as I could tell, in U.S. history. And it only took him a couple years to have everybody on board. Why? Because some states were already willing. Others were on the fence, and others were expressly against it. So his proposed ban of marijuana was something that, well, was already being talked about. So when the Department of Prohibition was going to be defunded and turned into nothing else, well, guess what? They didn't really. You know how the story goes? There's nothing eternal except God and a federal agency. The Department of Prohibition did not go away. No. It just transitioned over a period of a few years into the Federal Bureau of Narcotics under the Department of the Treasury. So you see, don't feel bad about all of those folks out there that had federal jobs. They're okay. They're fine. Don't worry about them. They're just going to transition to a new department. Ultimately, Anslinger sought and received, as head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, an increase of reports about the smoking of marijuana. And that started in 1935, the end of 1935 to 1936, and accelerated into 1937. Why did he get these reports? What were these reports? These were hearsay reports. These were reports with absolutely no scientific evidence attached to it. These were reports made up by friends. And these were reports made up that demonized a neighbor. See, before that, smoking of marijuana had been relatively slight and confined to mostly in the Southwest, mostly along the Mexican border. But now, he made it seem like it had turned into a wildfire that went all throughout the country. And, well, was that the case? Well, not really. Much like cocaine and opium, marijuana was a popular ingredient in many medical products sold in the late 19th century. And it wasn't until after the Mexican Revolution in 1910 when legal Mexican immigrants arrived in the States with marijuana in tow. Now, of course, it was called cannabis. It had a proper name. The slang was also introduced by Anslinger to make it sound more demonic. As instability mounted in the Depression era, the fear of the Mexican immigrants escalated with anti-marijuana sentiment from the public and the government. Why? Because it was believed that they brought this, or it was told to the population that they brought this great demon with them that was to destroy our population. And then by 1931, of course, the agreement was with those 29 states that marijuana would be outlawed. There is a state solution to the problem. But of course, in 37, the federal government, they had the Marijuana Tax Act. That was a law that criminalized marijuana's possession and sale. Now, in, I think it was 52 or 53, the feds implemented more severe measures with, I think it was the Boggs Act. Somebody check me on that, if you would, please. I think it was the Boggs Act. That enforced mandatory sentences for offenses, and it was first offense for marijuana was like 2 to 10 years. Then, of course, in the 60s and 70s, drug use, it escalated with the counterculture and free love, Summer of Love, 67, yo, dude, how's it doing, And what happened? Congress passed the Controlled Substance Act of 1970. And that established the different categories for drugs, and that categorized marijuana as a class 1 drug, which was the most restrictive category of drugs. And we're going to go through that in a minute.
Greg, Boggs
Sir.
Act of 1951.
Very good, Greg. My memory ain't what it used to be, but I'm still close. 51. Got it. Thank you, sir. So in 1972, just want to finish the chronology here, and then we'll talk to everybody else that we got in the room already. I noticed people popped in here. And in 72, President Nixon, the demonic President Nixon, who slightly lied, much like all of our other presidents, he put together one of those bipartisan commissions to evaluate the laws that were affecting the use and distribution of marijuana. And the commission determined that personal use of marijuana should be, say it isn't so, should be decriminalized. That was a recommendation to the president. And what did he say? He said, I don't believe so. He said, no way. But the commission's findings were taken very seriously in other parts of the land outside the walls of D.C. And at that point, right after that, 11 states decriminalized marijuana. That was after the commission published the report and stuff, after the lowly states were allowed to know what was happening. Now, and then in the 80s, public opinion shifted again, and President Reagan, right, became the champion of the war on drugs, the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, 1986, I think it was. What happened then? The penalties for marijuana possession and dealing went through the roof. You would be behind bars for like 5 to 40 years. First offense. Wow. Much like the New York State Rockefeller drug laws, which were draconian in nature. See, but that was a state law. This is some federal law that really shouldn't be on the books in the first place. Anyway, fast forwarding into the 90s, California was, again, after everybody criminalized it again, about 15 years later, California legalizes possession and use for what? Medical purposes. Why? Because, and here's the kicker, the federal government owns a laboratory in Alabama. And the federal government is the only one legally allowed at this time to grow and produce cannabis. That's right. You can't do it, but the federal government had been doing it for a very, very long time. And some of the information that had gotten out and some of the information that was done in other countries where marijuana was not criminalized got into the hands of the Californian lawmakers. And they found that, yes, there is substantial research that supports medical use for marijuana. Matter of fact, it seems like our bodies were made to consume the marijuana. And we'll get into that neurotransmitter activity and things like that a little bit later on, and how they perfectly match up with the hemp plants. Now, in 2012, I want to say 2012, 2013, somewhere in there, about 20 states had laws that permitted use of marijuana for medical purposes. And what happened? The feds came with those huge crackdowns, the raids. You folks remember this. I'm sure you do. The feds would go and raid one of those medical marijuana stores in California or some other state, claiming that it was the front for a large-scale drug operation. And how many times was that the truth? Oh, none. Yeah, none. But that was the same time that I think it was Washington and Colorado approved marijuana for recreational use too. Now, as far as I know, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Alaska, California, Maine, Massachusetts, and Nevada all have approved recreational use of marijuana laws on their books. And by the way, not a state, but duly noting here that Washington, D.C. Also has legalized recreational marijuana use laws on the books. Oh, snap. So the lawmakers telling you that you can't recreationally use marijuana anywhere have the right to recreationally use marijuana in our notion's capital. I see I've got on here now with me. Booger is here. Booger, welcome to the show. Glad you could make it today.
Thank you
get
very
all those
much.
computers, get all the computers straight.
No, one of them still down, but I got this one up, so I managed to get on.
Awesome. What do you think of the fact that DC in DC, all of our senators and congressmen can smoke pot legally, but nobody else can?
Oh, it's typical government hypocrisy.
You said the H word.
Oh yes, they can laundry money. They can get bribes in the form of loans that are forgiven later. Yeah, I figured that one out. Yeah, hey, give them a loan, and then just allow them to just forgive the loan when it looks like they're going to default. They don't have to pay any income taxes on the bribe you gave them, and they get away scot free.
That's right, Scott. And so that's where we're going. Actually, with our national debt, I'll tell you right now, we're going to default on it. It's got to be the way to go.
And not to mention that they have the ability for insider trading. How do you think they become millionaires? They go there, right, middle class, and within a couple of years, they're multimillionaires.
Sure. Well, they're making the laws for Wall Street, and they know when those laws take effect, and when all the trading houses have to put them into effect. So it's going to affect the return on different investments in different ways. They're completely aware of that stuff. Absolutely. That's a good point there.
They know who's going to get the next defense contract. They know who's getting every contract for government. They know who's going to make the money. So where do you invest? Where people are going to make the money?
Invest with the best. Congress.
Yep.
Sorry, that was terrible. So let me go over a couple of the laws here that we were talking about a little bit, just to verify. And if Suzanne comes back, when she comes back, we had Suzanne Sherman there in the outskirts and the hinterlands of Utah. Talking, just a side note here, real quick, Booger, Jeff. Just want to let you guys know that the name Idaho was completely made up for statehood. Just let you know that. So, unlike Utah,
I don't know what I would have done had I never done that.
See that? That's an important footnote in history right there. Completely made up name. Yeah. I don't know that I would do the Don Imus, Idaho thing. But yeah, that's just a footnote of very important stuff you should never forget.
It might be on Jeopardy someday, which I won't be on.
Oh, you know what? That's a great idea. I should actually have them. Well, we have to see what happens with Alex Trebek first. Right? He's got stage 4 cancer. So don't know if Jeopardy will be canceled. Hopefully he'll be able to fulfill his contract of the next 3 years or so. We're rooting for him, though. Big time praying for him.
Try to get Oberman to do it or something like that.
Oh, Jeopardy will never come back on in my house. It just won't. It's not going to happen.
One thing I've found pretty interesting when people are talking about legalizing these drugs, they should actually be saying re-legalize.
Oh, yeah, totally right. Totally right. Yeah, like I mentioned with marijuana before, it was used in medications. And if you look at it, a lot of these medications, like opium, It was
Yes.
legally imported for over 100 years in the United States. I mean, give me a break.
Yes.
By
And
1858, there was 300,000 pounds of opium that came to the States each year. I mean, come on.
yeah, and being on the front line of the drug war in multiple countries, I have seen more human suffering by far from the drug war than I'll say ever took place during the time period where they were legal or is even taking place now from the actual consumption. It's one of those things. There is no perfect right answer,
Right.
but looking at alcohol, the prohibition alcohol, the corruption that was coming in, uh, who knows how far down the line we would have gotten, if we'd kept going with that. The amount of corruption that enters politics. That
Oh, booger,
you
you
know.
just stole my thunder for the
Oh,
wrap up of the show.
go ahead. Sorry, man.
Oh, that was
Sorry.
exactly it.
Sorry, brother.
Oh, score, booger. So the point of the show today is all of these illegal interventions from the federal government have actually sent us down the path that they, quote, were trying to keep us off of.
Yeah.
Oh, you nailed it, booger. Thank you.
Yeah.
You only needed 5 minutes of the show. God, got it, man.
Sorry.
You're
I mean,
good.
we had an incident here in this little town in Indiana here recently where the DEA calls down and tells our local police force to interdict a vehicle. Okay, well, they do it. And one of the guys in the vehicle had 77 grams of heroin. The police officer shut off his body camera. They played let's make a deal. He pays the guy $10,000 to let him throw the 77 grams of heroin out in the middle of town. Okay. And he gets back. I forget who it was actually told this to somebody else, whether it was the guy in the car or the police officer himself told someone that he didn't think would say anything, but the whole thing came out. Okay. I mean, you just look at all of all of the stuff involved in that. That's just one little example of the corruption, taking place here.
Man, oh man. From Harry Anslinger. By the tons of it coming into this country, the deadly, dreadful poison that racks and tears not only the body, but the very heart and soul of every human being who once becomes a slave to it in any of its cruel and devastating forms. Marijuana is a shortcut to the insane asylum. Smoke marijuana cigarettes for a month, and what was once your brain will be nothing but a storehouse for horrid specters. Hashish makes a murderer who kills for the love of killing out of the mildest mannered man who ever laughed at the idea that any habit could ever get him. Wow, oh, wow. And interestingly enough, mass media was what got the message out. It was the newspapers. And can anybody guess whose newspaper from the yellow journalism annals of history? Yes, it was William Randolph Hearst who got Anslinger's message out and propelled it around the Union. And he used what was called, quote, the Gore Files. That's right, Gore, the Gore Files, which was a collection of quotes from police reports to graphically depict the offenses caused by drug users. They were written in very, how would you say, terse language, very concise. It was the writing was impeccable. If you look in the American magazine from 1936, I think it was, there was an article about Victor Licata, a guy who killed his family. It was very graphic. and very much a lie. But it made it into publication. So why was William Randolph Hearst helping Harry Anslinger to make marijuana production, distribution, and consumption illegal in the States? Well, did you know that hemp paper is much more durable than the regular paper that you use from wood? It's much more stable. It's cheaper to make. You can make more of it. See, William Randolph Hearst also owned the largest lumbering company in the Northwest and North Central United States. Not only was he making millions and millions, I should say, I should turn on the Carl Sagan voice, billions and billions of dollars from his newspaper articles that were selling like wildfire. No, he made the newspaper articles, folks, to sell what? To sell the paper. Because the paper came from the trees. And his lumbering company had a near monopoly in the Northwest and North Central United States. It's true that William Randolph Hearst ran some obscenely crazy stories. And people often miss the link between the fact that he owned the company that provided the paper, so he could sell lots of papers. He wasn't selling lots of papers to increase circulation, to gain notoriety. No. Again, that's the deception. That's what they want you to see. The real story is that he owned the lumbering companies. That's the story. He made the papers to sell the papers and promoted the papers through the papers. And he would do it for anybody who had a story. And didn't Harry Anslinger have just the most graphic stories to tell? He certainly did. And those stories became some of the most famous, ensuring and solidifying William Randolph Hearst as the king of yellow journalism. The story of marijuana and making it illegal is not some public health story. Of course, albeit the federal government would like you to believe that it was all related to public health. It's not. Here's another good example from the articles. Quote, colored students at the University of Minnesota partying with white female students, smoking marijuana, and getting their sympathy with stories of racial persecution. Result, pregnancy. Another quote, 2 Negroes took a girl 14 years old and kept her for 2 days under the influence of hemp. Upon recovery, she found to be suffering from syphilis. And another, reefer makes darkies think they're as good as white men. Are you kidding me? Not only was this guy a POS, he was a racist POS at that, because he came up with almost all of these different stories himself. How would folks, it is so sad. Did you realize that there was these racists in the federal government like this, Booger?
Okay, I unmuted my mic. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
It's quite incredible. I mean, wow. Especially, I mean, when you look at the whole thing, that's just preying on the fear. And anytime you hear anything like that, where a politician or anybody is just really hitting your fear button hard, you've got to step back and ask for rational thought.
Man,
Hey, Greg,
that's it.
I find it really hard to believe with how virtuous our rulers in Washington are that anything like this could ever happen. It's just, it boggles the mind.
I think everyone here and everyone out in the audience is probably familiar with Billie Holiday, famous blues singer. She sang in 1939. She was on stage in New York City and sang a song called "Strange Fruit," and that was in reference to illegal drugs. And the federal government sent a guy and told her to stop singing the song. Don't ever sing that song again. Is that an overextension of government, do you guys think?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So here's another interesting point that, Jeff, you might want to remember this one. In Anslinger's book, of course, he wrote a book called The Protectors back in 1964. And in there, chapter 5 or 6, I think it was, jazz and junk don't mix. It's a story about black jazz musicians and the use of marijuana, in his opinion of what happened. And it listed Billie Holiday in there. And do you know why it listed her? Because on Billie Holiday's deathbed, Anslinger showed up. And what did he do? He handcuffed her on suspicion of drug use and possession. Let that sink in for a minute. From the book, he says, jazz entertainers are neither fish nor fowl. They do not get the $1 million protection Hollywood and Broadway can afford for their stars who have become addicted. And there are many more than will ever be revealed. Perhaps this is because jazz, once considered a decadent kind of music, has only token respectability. Jazz grew up next door to crime, so to speak, clubs of dubious reputations. For a long time, the only places where it could be heard. But the times bring change. And as Billie Holiday was a victim of time and change, so too was Charlie Parker. He also died of illegal drug use. A man whose music, like Billie's, is still widely imitated. Most musicians credit Parker, among others, as spearheading what was called modern jazz. But modern jazz, as all things associated with illegal drug use, only bring death and destruction. People get what they deserve. Now, how cool is that? This guy is like out of his wacko head, right? He hates these people. And when I say these people, I mean people that are, using drugs a little bit too much. For God's sakes, dude, take a deep breath and chill out. Now, Jeff, because you like this stuff, I'm going to give you one guess at what other famous person was involved with the making marijuana illegal. So, you ready?
I'm
Go.
ready. I'm thinking. I don't know. Well, let's see. I know there's the Rockefeller law, so the Rockefeller was involved in it. Let's see.
That was what I was going to hit.
Okay, strike one. No, that's okay.
Oh, wow.
Booger might know. I'm not sure.
Well, I was going to say Rockefeller as well, Jeff. With the trying to get all of his petroleum-based chemicals to be the only option.
Who was this?
I thought Rockefeller, like you said.
Oh. No, but you're so close. I'm going to let it go with that because that's close enough. The DuPonts.
Yep.
Because they're petrochemical interests. That's right. Perfect.
Yeah, I knew it was for the petrochemicals. They wanted that to be the only option.
That's Booger. You are spot on.
Now I know why I didn't like Jeff Gordon.
You know what's interesting on this?
Go ahead.
This is very interesting, Greg. They bring up, this marijuana deviant sexual behavior. I have a friend that is he has really bad acid reflux disease, and he is taking 3 different pharmaceutical medications. No joke, the side effects of 2 of the 3 negative side effects is deviant sexual behavior. But see, the pharmaceutical companies are making millions off of it. So it's perfectly fine that those cause deviant sexual behavior.
That's right. This episode of The Spy Who Loves Liberty are brought to you today by the letters F and U and by the number 1, because that's what you're getting, pal. You're getting slammed by the feds, by the chemical companies, the pharmaceutical companies. You're taking it, buddy. Let me tell you. Oh my gosh, it is such a major scam that's going on. So now remember, marijuana, cannabis itself, is listed as what? It's a Schedule 1 drug. So what are Schedule 1 drugs? So under the Controlled Substance Act that was put in place back in 1970, this is what the DEA uses to divide into 5 categories, which are schedules. Drugs based on the potential for abuse, safety, addictive potential, and whether or not it has any legitimate medical applications. Ha ha ha. So what do we have as Schedule 1 drugs? We have heroin. We have LSD. We have ecstasy, which is methylene dioxymethamphetamine, if you want to use the full name. We have methaqualone and peyote. And there's some other ones thrown in there, but those are, that's just an example of some of the really tough ones. Oh, yeah, by the way, did I say marijuana? I think I said marijuana. Yeah, marijuana is a Schedule 1 drug because it has the same problems So this sliding scale that the feds use, like for potential abuse, safety, addictive potential, and legitimate medical applications, this must have a really, 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 really skewed weighting system. Because nowhere in there, in items 1, 2, 3, or 4, does marijuana score higher than on a scale of 1 to 10 would be maybe a 2? Other than, if you're going to say medical application, 0, yes, 10, no, then it would be about a 2 or so. If you look at all the research that's out there from other countries, which the FDA and, of course, the DEA are not going to look at, because they're not Americans, they're not as good as us, they're not as smart as us, so they say. So those are examples of Schedule 1 drugs. Now, granted, some of these are problematic. Some of these are, yes, highly addictive. Some of these are extremely, extremely problematic and can hurt you very badly over long-term use. But don't forget, it's okay when the feds use it. So don't be fooled. Why do I say that? Oh, I don't know. LSD, created in 1938 by the Swiss guy, Albert Hofmann. By mistake, he ingested some of the drugs. Go figure. And when the drug got here to the States, yeah, guess who got it? Yeah, the CIA. MK Ultra, LSD mind control experiments and the drug's effect on manipulating behavior for interrogating people. Yeah, go figure. After the military interest dropped off, and we were told the CIA's interest in it dropped off, the psychiatric community began to test the drug for therapeutic treatments with epileptic and depressed patients. One of the first groups to use LSD for non therapeutic purposes were those who received the drugs from psychiatric friends. So it was a small group of people. Then it became very popular, as many of us know, in the 60s with the counterculture movement. And interestingly enough, there were two major groups that played a very important in popularizing LSD. That was the League for Spiritual Discovery. I enjoyed researching this for sure. The League for Spiritual Discovery and the Merry Pranksters. Now, the League for Spiritual Discovery focused on academic experiments related to human consciousness, but the Merry Pranksters, these are the guys who are off the hook. They hosted these LSD-fueled parties. So the Merry Prankster events were called acid tests, and they combined LSD with musical experimentation to create these massive hallucinogenic experiences. And that's what kind of helped shape the psychedelic art and the acid rock movement that was associated with the Summer of Love in '67. Of course, now it's a Schedule I drug. So, of course, you can't use it anymore. Schedule II drugs. These are drugs, substances, or chemicals that are defined as drugs with a high potential for abuse, less abuse potential than Schedule I drugs, with use potentially leading to severe psychological or physical dependence. These drugs are also considered dangerous. What could these be? Cocaine, methamphetamine, methadone, hydromorphine, oxycodone, or Oxycontin. Oxycontin is just the extended release version of oxycodone, in case for all those non-medical folks out there. Fentanyl, Dexedrine, Adderall, Ritalin. Now, can anybody out there seriously tell me that marijuana is worse than cocaine? Or marijuana is worse than Oxycontin?
I'd argue no sane man could.
Or methamphetamine, or meth. Because the Schedule I drugs are supposed to be drugs, substances, or chemicals are defined by the federal government as drugs with no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. Schedule I drugs are the most dangerous of all drug schedules with potentially severe psychological and physical dependence. Now, how can you put marijuana in that list of Schedule I drugs at all? No, as you said, Booger, no sane person is going to say that. There's no way it can be in there with heroin. Schedule III drugs. Moderate to low potential for physical and psychological dependency. And the rest is blah, blah, blah. Lower than Schedule II. So what would these things be? Oh, Vicodin, T3, Tylenol 3 with codeine, anabolic steroids, and testosterone. Can you really get addicted to testosterone or anabolic steroids? I don't know. Schedule IV shows drugs, substances, and chemicals low potential for abuse, and low risk of dependence. Xanax, Soma, Darvon, Darvocet, Valium, Ativan, Talwin, and Ambien. I know people that are hooked on Xanax and Ambien and Valium that don't go around smoking pot all day. I'm just saying. Here, Schedule 5 drugs, just a couple of examples. Robitussin AC, that's the one with codeine in it. Lomotil, Modafinil, and I don't even know what this is. I just put it on here because I could pronounce it at one time. Lyrica. Lyrica. Holy cow. What in the world is wrong with us? We got some of these things on here that it just doesn't even make any sense because they're not addictive. I just don't understand it. I don't understand it. And what is Modafinil? In case you were curious, Modafinil is actually one of my favorites because it looks like the Pentagon, so it looks like it's a war. Okay, on your bowels, right? It's an anti-diarrheal medication, is what it is, and the reason it's on there is because it has atropine in it, and we know atropine, dries you up, sucks you up dry, and everything like that. It takes all the moisture out of your body, so you don't have any more diarrhea. But that's it. But so how many people are addicted to Modafinil? And why would it be restricted? Are there people out there that would be looking to intentionally dehydrate themselves? Is that the plan? I can't. I'm just beside myself with trying to figure out. But here, there's a little. I do have a footnote to throw into the list of scheduled drugs I'd like everyone to take note of. Is recently there was a update to a paper called "The Impact of Marijuana Policies on Youth Clinical Research and Legal Update," and there was an update in that scholarly work by the American Academy of Pediatrics. And it says, quote, their statement says that they recommend the rescheduling of marijuana from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 2 drug. This is because some of the active ingredients in the marijuana, bowleg cannabis on bowleg plant, called cannabinoids, have been shown, here you go, in limited research to have medical benefit for some particular conditions in adults, such as helping control nausea and vomiting due to cancer, chemotherapy, or specific chronic pain syndromes. A little truthful and a little misguiding. Why do they say it like that? Well, because they don't want their funding from the feds cut. The American Academy of Pediatrics receives a huge grant from the federal government every year from the Food and Drug Administration for all of the research that they do, and the CDC. And they don't want that money to dry up. So if they come out too strongly and say, hey, this is BS, we're going to throw the BS flag here because this is stupid. William Randolph Hearst and all of the DuPonts from back in the day are dead. Knock it off, cut the crap out. Let's get this thing straight and correct it. But I did notice one interesting thing as I did read through the research and some of the associated literature. I found that the American Academy of Pediatrics said that there was limited research for some particular conditions in adults. And if we look at the word pediatric, we know that that is related to the little children's out there, not the adults. So, why is the American Academy of Pediatrics talking about fixes for adults? Bottom line is, well, they don't want to get in trouble with the feds. They want to keep it open, clean, and just clear. Because if they talk about benefits to children, well, guess what? Now we're experimenting with children with marijuana. It's a Schedule One drug. Why are you experimenting with Schedule One drugs? We said they're bad. You got problems, and nobody wants problems like that. Booger, do you think these guys are going to come out and take the reins and maybe try to take control of something and step up the fight against the feds, or do you think it's going to be the states that do it?
Well, I think it's going to be the states, because if you look into like the FDA, which I say is missing an M, it should be Food and Drug Mafia Association. They actually receive staggering amounts of money from the pharmaceutical giants. I've read where it's in the billions. If you look at all of the funding the FDA has received.
Right.
So the feds are one big angle to look at on it, but look at the other angle of the influence of money, okay, from the drug giants. They're going to have a whole lot to say on that.
That's a really good point, Booger. As a matter of fact, I remember in doing research that there was research done to oversee research that was sponsored by the Centers for Disease Control, in that people from the CDC were waiting to approve or approving things as they could adjust their stock portfolio. Let me put it like that. To get ready for an IPO or get ready to release a certain cancer medicine, or things along those lines there. People would go nutso if they read some of these ethical violations for almost all of the people that worked in the research oversight and approval at the Centers for Disease Control. You're absolutely right. It's all about the money, Booger. It always is, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Mm-mm-mm.
You look at the CDC whistleblowers that have come out on different topics, especially getting into a lot of the vaccination stuff, and how they have had their lives destroyed, basically.
Exactly. That's right. That's right. The feds will seek the wolves on them because you're starting to chip away at that oligarchy that's controlling everything. You can't be seen as having any type of shortcomings and difficulties anywhere. Well, folks, Booger, appreciate it very much, sir. Thank you for your wisdomatically incited comments. And unfortunately, Suzanne, I wanted to get to the legal stuff today and talk about some of the laws that were created back in said yonder day regarding all of the drug use and the takeover of the feds by the drug, of the drug traffic. But it didn't happen, and maybe we'll cover that a little bit more in the future. So, like the smoking Opium Exclusion Act, the Harrison Act, Harrison Anti-Narcotic Act, and Webb et al. That was interesting, and some of the other Supremist Court cases. Maybe we'll be able to knock that out another day.
That sounds like fun. Hey, good morning, everybody. Junk Bond, you're welcome to stick around because I'm going to be going live with the Wasatch Report momentarily. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Susanna. Oh,
Good morning,
Susanna. Utah cries for you. So for everybody else here at Cerberus Radio, this is Gregory Junk Bond Carpenter, getting ready to step out of the Spy Who Loves Liberty and hand it off to the most incomparable and amazing Suzanne Sherman for her Wasatch Report. You all have a great day.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. I'm Suzanne Sherman, and this is a Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. Hey, if you're just tuning in, you missed the first hour of some radio awesomeness here today. We had The Spy Who Loves Liberty with Junk Bond and Booger, and Jeff was in the captain's chair weighing in, I believe. And if you missed that show, go ahead and find us on SoundCloud. It should be up a little bit later on. It will also be up on YouTube. If you are on YouTube listening live right now, you can join our chat room and participate in our discussion. We have a Radio Co link. You can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network, and you can hear shows on a 24/7 loop. Radio Excellence. All of our shows are on there, including our new one, Prepper Chicks After Dark. If you missed yesterday's show, I had Annie Burdell, post-APOC author extraordinaire, also known as Prepper Chicks. Check out her wildly popular Facebook page. She was one of the gals that got me started when I was new to preparedness, and she was a great interview. I look forward to doing a lot more with her in the future. Very resourceful gal. Check out her book, also, The Alpha Farm. And let's see, we have a new episode of Fundamentals of Federalism. Jeff and I did some overtime work on the weekend, and we recorded that episode of AR-15s. And that was called, I think, Muskets to AR-15, Weapons of War or Enemies of Tyranny. That was the audio version of an article that the 10th Amendment published that Carl Jones and I co-authored. So check that out as well. You can find all of our radio links on my webpage, SuzanneCSherman.com. The SoundCloud has a button there. YouTube has a button. All of my articles are listed under Suzanne's articles and latest blogs as well. So that is until we get our Cerberus Radio network website up and running. You can find all of that there. And I believe Greg Junkbond Carpenter is working on that as well. Gregory Junkbond, I see that you are still here, so maybe you can participate in today's shows, because I've got a story that is right up your alley. Our good friend Jim Bovard wrote an article about the FBI and the truth and many of the lies big government tells us. So hopefully he'll stick around to contribute to that. I'm also going to be talking about free speech, more censorship for Austin Peterson, and article about a very painful interview. I did not hear it, but I have the lowdown on a discussion with Christiane Armenpour and James Comey on whether or not the FBI should shut down hate speech. Also, a tale of two perspectives. We have an issue. The Supreme Court has weighed in on the Eighth Amendment and the death penalty. And I have a little bit of, again, some firearms regulations. We have the Supreme Court refusing to weigh in on the bump stock ban. And let's see. Oh, and a proposed ammo ban. That being said, let's do a roll call. Jeff, how are you this morning?
Bueller.
Well, there's a demerit.
Mueller.
There's a demerit from Mr. Producer. Junk Bond, I see you're here, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. Great show this morning. Great show yesterday.
Bow, chicka, bow, bow. Hello. We had a great time this morning again. I'll tell you what. My only regret is we didn't get into the laws. I wanted to get into the laws, but I understand how it goes. You just start going, and you just don't stop. And the next thing you know, boom, you're out of time.
You know, when I first started doing this radio thing and we were working with Mike Church, he wanted me to do 2 hours after a little while. And I said, oh my gosh, I couldn't even imagine doing 2 hours. And he said to me, you know, there's going to come a time when 1 hour won't even won't even remotely be enough time. And that's where we're at now, where we're talking. And I realize, holy moly, half the show's over and I haven't even gotten to the main topic yet. But that's why we try to have more shows. And one of the things I notice with people with the 3-hour shows is, you know, the listeners can't listen in the whole time. So I'd rather just get our topics in there and let people hear it in an hour. And I appreciate the time that they spend with us very, very much. And Greg, give a quick recap for those who might have missed the first hour so they can go and find it on SoundCloud, please.
Oh, absolutely. So at 9 a.m. Eastern time, we started this fabulous show. And quick recap is at 10 a.m. Eastern, we completed it. I mean, right on time. It was just fabulous, Suzanne.
That's incredible analysis there.
A little bit too concise, though. So we spoke about the legalization of marijuana, or the legal status of some of the controlled drugs on the different schedules, and we talk about the ridiculousness of the illegality of them now.
Let's just make up
and went back and sourced it to, you know, some of the most powerful people in the U.S. at the time who funded it and got rich off of it.
Well, and we did a great show on that. You did another one also. We did one together about who was getting rich off of it. We went into William Randolph Hearst, who essentially wanted to ban hemp because it was competition for making the paper, and he had just purchased vast expanses of forest, and those were the trees he was going to use. So if we can't,
and it was his company that cut down the trees in his forest. You know, the whole thing was, and he owned the union. He paid off the union that owned the laborers that cut down the trees in his forest. It's like the tree in the bog, that Irish drinking song. Everything's connected and connected and connected. I mean, you can go down like 26 different layers of abstraction, and you still have the fingerprint of William Randolph Hearst inside of this system where he's paying himself to make money for himself and putting it into trusts, so there's no tax on it, and it's just mind-boggling.
We'll have to post that episode again, but you can find those all on SoundCloud. We have them itemized, so you can check and see what the topics are. And scroll down there, have a great time. I know Junk Bond just did another episode of the of Liberty Minutes. Those are outstanding. I just did one on, as I said, fundamentals of federalism. I just reached out to our friendly resident tame historian, Dave Benner, who is going to get on Case in Point with me again as soon as we can coordinate our schedules. And we are going to this time go over the case of Barron versus Baltimore, much like McCulloch versus Maryland, the last one we covered. These are pretty obscure cases. And I'll tell you something, they might be obscure and you might not have ever heard of them unless you went to law school, but they have impacted our lives today. And I'll tell you a little something else about law school. We never covered Barron versus Baltimore in law school. And when we cover that case, I will tell you why. Let me refer you also to another episode or an article that I wrote for the Abbeville Institute. Don Livingston personally asked me to write it. It's called The Problem with Lawyers and the Constitution. And I've been sharing that. And it is very enlightening. People understand and figure out, why do lawyers always get it wrong? And we're going to
covered those back in high school. I want you to know that.
I didn't know you then.
Barron versus Baltimore, that was 1833. I covered that back in high school with my AP.
No.
I had an AP American history class, and the teacher said, "This is not American history." He said, "This is civics." And we were all like, whatever, dude, we don't care, right? Who cares? You call it civics, we call it history, whatever. He said, "You're never going to say the word social studies in here. You're going to use the term civics. And that's what we're going to know this class as." So I was like, "But it's AP American history." He's like, "Didn't I tell you to shut up once, Greg?" I was like, well, I don't know. But I know that one. That's when the Supreme Court said that the Constitution's Bill of Rights is only for the federal government and not the state governments. And that's all I got out of that. That's all I remember. But I think that's enough.
You get a cookie. And interestingly enough, the individual who handed down that opinion was Justice
Marshall,
who was
right?
no
I
ratification.
remember that part too. Yay, Greg.
So we'll get into a little bit about that because that case has been obfuscated. People just don't teach it in law school. We never discussed it there. And that case really, if you understand that case, there was no reason for that to be overturned, which it really was effectively in Gitlow versus the United States in 1925. So we'll spend some more time on that. But right now I want to talk about, maybe because I'm still licking my wounds from my 45. I think this is a record, my 45-day Facebook penitentiary sentence that I had.
We should open up all your shows with like Johnny Cash songs from San Quentin or something, or Folsom Prison.
Right. And
I'm stuck in Facebook prison.
I had 14 days to go, and they found another 8-year-old comment. Again, 2 years or 8 years to silence me. In fact, a friend of mine reached out and said, "You better watch it. I'm sure the FBI is listening." And I said, "Well, if they're not, I'm not doing my job."
That's a new book coming out, folks. Next fall, The Silence of Suzanne.
It ain't happening. Here's a guy, Austin Peterson has been banned from Facebook again. Junk Bond, you weren't on with me the other day, but we were talking again about Facebook censorship, and the all the tech giants are working in cahoots to silence opposition. For instance, the movie Unplanned and what Twitter was doing with them. We saw what happened with Jordan Peterson. Well, here Austin Peterson has gotten another ban. He's a lightweight, man. What a slacker. He's only getting 3-day bans. But on Tuesday, April 3rd, this is an article from the Libertarian Republic. He tweeted out that both his personal and public Facebook pages were put on a 3-day ban due to graphic violence. What is Facebook referring to, you may ask? Well, on his personal page, he made a comment referring to some shooting and the government getting their gun-grabbing hands all around the tragedy. And he said, "Never let a crisis go to waste." Well, I believe it was Cass Sunstein who said that as well. And it is absolutely factual that we see the gun grabbers taking advantage of these crises. Case in point, the incident in New Zealand. And now we're actually talking about banning the AR-15 here. With regards to the AR-15, I refer you to the episode I mentioned earlier, Fundamentals of Federalism, why we capitulate, that we are trying to ban militarized weapons. These are not military grade weapons. So check out that episode. Going back to this article, they say this isn't the first time that they've tried to zook Austin during the 2018 primary elections. He was banned twice on Facebook, once on Twitter. Both times he was banned on Facebook because of a raffle he was doing for his campaign, giving away a free AR-15, the boogeyman of firearms. Once upon a time, it was the handgun, but St. Scalia saved us from handgun bans. But in so doing, in his misinterpretation of the Second Amendment, he left the door open for the AR-15 bans and ammo bans, bump stock bans, everything else that we are going to see. I'm going to touch on a couple of those in a little bit here. But both times these bans were overturned. He must be special because I get no appellate process or due process on Facebook. But
your due process is done.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not bitter, mind you. Yes, of course I'm bitter. The time on Twitter was because he was trolling a leftist group that backed his opponent with a GIF of, is it GIF or GIF? Of Joseph.
So
GIF, thank you, of Joseph Stalin that said "off to the gulag now," and that was approved by Twitter prior to this incident. And here they continue by saying, "I think at this point it's kind of obvious that Facebook and Twitter are okay with censoring anyone to the right of Mao, from Jordan Peterson to the pro-life movie Unplanned," which I mentioned earlier. So double down, spread the word, stand up to the Facebook censorship. Again, it's I'm not calling for more government regulation. Interestingly enough, as I discussed yesterday from a Mises article, our friend Ryan McMakin, who's been on the show, had explained Zuckerberg and Facebook themselves are seeking more regulation because it will benefit them. It will assist them in having a monopoly on the platform. And I submit to you that these tech giants, Facebook, Twitter, Google, they already have the the ability to moderate and determine the content of speech in the town square of the 21st century. And that's the internet, not just social media, but what you want to post, what the search results are. We've talked about that before. So there's an interesting couple articles that I saw, and this was one called "Should the FBI Shut Down Hate Speech?" Quick little side note, you're going to laugh at this, but I have a gal that is a friend of mine down in Park City, and we all hang out and see each other and go work out together. And I don't know much about her personally. She's just a sweet gal, and I figure, Park City, she's probably very liberal. And one of our other friends was asking her a lot of questions. Well, what does your husband do? I've never met her husband. She goes, oh, he was a Marine, and now he's in law enforcement. And I'm just sitting there, trying to mind my own business. I always fail. But anyway, our mutual friend was asking her, what branch? And she would not, oh, no. She turned bright red. I don't want to talk about it. And he just kept naming them till he finally said FBI. Ding, 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 ding. This gal should never play poker. So it was very apparent. She was so embarrassed at her husband's vocation. She didn't even want to say. I mean, you would think you'd be proud to say what your spouse does. So this is at one point, I can't stand it any longer. So of course I have to weigh in. What's he feel about James Comey? She goes, he won't talk about it. He can't talk about it. He can never talk about his work. So here these people are apparently that are they have their jobs, they have their pensions coming up, and they're so cowed they cannot even speak out against the organization for whom they work. So a little bit about the FBI. Should the FBI shut down hate speech? Well, they shut down speech in their own department. I just kept thinking, who wants to be the first to speak out against the Fuhrer? Not me. I've got my pension. Anyway, I totally digress, but I just thought that was a funny story in light of what I'm going to discuss today. But here this article posits the question, should the FBI shut down hate speech? And they're referring to an interview with Christiane Amanpour interviewing James Comey. Would you?
Can I ask a question up front?
Yeah.
Before you get started in this, isn't the root word here speech? And isn't the federal government prohibited from making any laws that limit our freedom of said speech, regardless of what adjective or adverb you associate with speech?
Well,
don't we have to accept hate speech with love speech? Isn't that what we're supposed to do?
It's a right that's not unlimited. That's some analysis I'm going to get into from another painful article from another lawyer. By the way, the other day I discussed one that was excruciatingly incorrect with regards to firearms and federal supremacy. I'm going to talk about now the First Amendment and another lawyer screwing it up just as much. Can you imagine?
It's like extending McCulloch versus Maryland all the way down to the individual.
Can you imagine? To me,
you cannot put more oatmeal in your bowl in the morning. The federal government has restricted the amount of oatmeal that you can serve your children every single morning. McCulloch, Maryland, 1820 or 21, or I forget the year, but
I think Richard B. Filburn would be more appropriate to discuss with oatmeal. But could you imagine
Filburn.
what I did?
I happen to know that obscure case too. That's the interstate commerce thing.
Commerce clause. That means anything that that might cross state lines is also under federal jurisdiction.
Even if you grow it on your own property for your own animals and own personal use, it's still subject to interstate commerce laws. That's Filburn, right?
Yep. Evil.
I'm getting better. Thank you for all the training, Suzanne. I'm getting better.
Can you imagine, though, how painful it would be to listen to this interview with Christiane Amanpour and James Comey? She asked Comey whether he wished the FBI had shut down people at the 2016 Trump rallies who chanted "lock her up" about Hillary Clinton. This was one of the ways also when they were saying "lock her up." He was referring to locking her up for crimes she had committed. We know she committed these crimes. Comey himself said she had, but because the DOJ and the FBI exist to protect people like Hillary Clinton and not look out for us, it wouldn't be fair to prosecute her. But going back to James Comey, and Trump was criticized for saying, "Well, we don't lock up about locking her up." They're saying, "Well, we don't lock up political opponents." This isn't about locking up political opponents. Nice try, Marxists. It's about locking up criminals. Hillary Clinton is a criminal.
Since when do we lock up criminals and not political opponents? Did we change how we do this somehow?
Well, ask Schaefer Cox, ask Bill Keebler out here, ask Lavoy Finicum, who was murdered.
Mm-hmm.
But here's what she said. Of course, lock her up was a feature of the 2016 Trump campaign. Do you, in retrospect, wish that people like yourself, the head of the FBI, the people in charge of law and order, had shut down that language, that it was dangerous potentially, that it could have created violence, that it kind of is hate speech? Should that have been allowed? Did anybody tell Maxine Waters to stop instigating violence by telling people in the Trump administration?
I think it's lawless order is what you're referring to.
Yeah, absolutely. So if there's a video at that link, I will not be watching it. I'm not going to click on it. I'm not going to subject myself. What do I do first? Do I stab my eyes or my ears first when that was playing? I don't know. But here we have the article saying the fact that a veteran journalist could ask such an insane question. I think veteran journalists and insane belong together. We know that, these organizations are just another branch of the Democrat Party. So Comey said the fact that they could ask such an insane question is shocking. No, it really isn't, depending on who the target audience is.
That's a redirect. That's all.
Yes, exactly. Comey explained that in the United States, it is not the job of the FBI to shut down political speech. The phrase.
Sorry, was that me? That was my outside of my head voice.
I know
I'm sorry.
This wasn't intended to be a comedy show, but how can you take these folks seriously? The phrase hate speech is a magic talisman. Exactly. But for the last 2 years, it's been impossible to assemble a group of 3 or more Democrats who didn't call Trump a traitor, or worse. Is that hate speech? Should the Democrats' craze smears against Trump be shut down? If not, why not? We're also seeing a huge disparity in treatment over the Me Too allegations here, for instance, with Joe Biden and the rush to defend him as opposed to the rush to judge Brett Kavanaugh. And even when it came to light that the women were lying through their teeth, we don't care. We need to believe them anyway. Joe's just really affectionate, my response, and Jeffrey Dahmer was just really hungry. Let's stop with the political rhetoric and inconsistency based on what side you're on. And let me go back to this. The real answer is that this is funny too. And this is my next segue into another article. And let's try and say this without laughing. I don't think I can. I think the real answer is that Democrats know that Republicans respect the Constitution and values free speech. Democrats can say whatever they want. That is true. There is no risk that Republicans will try to shut them down, no matter how often they claim absurdly that Donald Trump is a would-be dictator. But when they gain power, the shoe will be on the other foot. Democrats have already succeeded in driving hate speech, as defined by them, to serve partisan ends from most social media outlets. It's only a matter of time before they make up a serious effort to shut down speech in public places that is critical of their leaders and lock up people who have the temerity to engage in it. I refer you now, they already have. They already have. There is a law. Let me find it here. HR 347, which prohibits protesting in areas where the Secret Service might be working. The law makes it, this was signed by Barack Obama. It's an expansion on an original law that was enacted in 1971. The law makes it easier for the government to criminalize a protest. It is a federal offense punishable by up to 10 years in prison to protest anywhere the Secret Service might be guarding someone. It's almost impossible to predict what constitutes disorderly or disruptive conduct or what sorts of conduct authorities deem to impede or disrupt orderly conduct of government business or official functions. First and foremost, the general government, this is my analysis now, as I've said before, is only empowered, they were only delegated to have authority over 3 crimes. 3. Only 3: piracy on the high seas, counterfeiting, and treason. The problem with
I
this law.
disagree.
Go
I
ahead.
disagree. The 3 crimes that they prosecute are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Amen. Those aren't the ones they're supposed to, but that's our de facto government that we have
Oh,
now.
my bad. Sorry about that.
What they're saying is they are robbing of your right to protest. Remember, we have the prohibition, not the right. It's a prohibition about the general government to keep you from speaking freely, to redressing the officials for grievances and peaceful assembly. All of those are banned right there. Now, if the Republicans respected the Constitution, we just, when Trump was elected, had control of all 3 branches of government. Tell me they could not have had this repealed in a nanosecond. The truth is, they've probably all forgotten we even have that law. If the Republicans really respected the Constitution, you would think right away they would want to get rid of that law. If they really respected the Constitution, we wouldn't be talking about the border wall. We wouldn't be talking about, I don't know, let's say bump stock bans. We can thank Donald Trump for a bump stock ban. And now the Washington court, here's an article from USA Today. The Supreme Court refused on Thursday to upend President Donald Trump's ban on bump stocks. As we know, this is a device that allows rifles to mimic automatic weapons. So once again, here's an example. We're going from the free speech area to the firearms area. 2 items of legislation, 2 topics that the general government was not only not delegated, but again, the restrictions were reiterated in the Bill of Rights. And we have now, with a Republican president and Senate, he was even discussing, remember, candidate Trump, I respect the Second Amendment. We need to enforce the laws we already have. So the Supreme Court now has left this ban in effect. The ban prohibits buying, selling, or otherwise transferring bump stocks. It went into effect last Tuesday. Gun rights group asked the court to halt it while federal appeals review the policy. Now, as I've discussed here before, the basis of seeking the overturn of this ban is that the president doesn't have the authority to do this, nor does the ATF. This is within the area of Congress to legislate. Nobody goes far enough in challenging this. What they should be saying, and we know this will fail, is that the law is unconstitutional per se. It does not matter which branch of these clowns in DC it came from. Even if it comes from Congress, it's just as unconstitutional. But it is lawful because of the 1934 Firearms Act. This is why I say there's a difference between something that is constitutional and something that is lawful. If we are to make any sort of sense out of the laws and the top-down rulings we get from DC today, the only way I could say, there was a big argument with our good friend Andrew about what is an invasion. Well, again, what America are you talking about? Are you talking about the Jeffersonian America where the states ratified the Constitution, or are you talking about the Hamiltonian Lincoln America after 1861, where the states are mere subsidiaries to the whole? So depending on which position you take, you are right. So getting back to the bump stock ban, we know that these bump stocks were used in the Vegas shooting. Trump instructed the attorney general to regulate their use. And in December, the justice officials issued the ban, giving owners 90 days to either turn them over to federal agents or melt, shred, or crush them. Government officials defended the ban. Of course they did, which remains under challenge in federal court. an addendum to a ban on machine guns. The federal government has no authority to ban machine guns either. That was a result of the 1934 St. Valentine's Day Massacre, which in turn was a result of Prohibition. Prohibition, we know, was the result of a constitutional amendment, but we see whether constitutional or otherwise, the war on drugs, prohibition always results in more violence. Government, going back to my previous article, never lets a crisis go to waste. I don't know how I do it, but all this stuff seems to tie together. That's rather clever of me. The 10th Amendment Center also.
Greg clapping.
Thank you.
Clap like Grover. Clap like Grover. Grover's so happy.
We have also the 10th Amendment Center. Also,
that's a lawyer. It's your job is to tie everything together, right?
Right, exactly.
I'm a public health doctor. My job is to didact away what is unnecessary from the root cause of the issue. Yours is to confound everything as much as possible and conflate things in such a way that people just can't figure out what the hell just happened.
Right. By the way, I'm drinking.
I think that's very professional.
I'm drinking from my favorite cup, my NSA coffee mug that you got me.
It's always, you know what? They're always on because it's always full.
I think this cup has a chip in it. I think I'm being spied on. But the
Who's doubting that? Come on.
Supreme Court lets the Trump bump stock stand. The 10th Amendment Center. You can find that article. Maybe we should post that. I'm finding it.
You should. I thought that was a fabulous article because it's completely insane. The way you explained it, I loved it. It was easy enough for I am not a law professional in any way whatsoever. You know, like most lawyers say, I am a constitutional. No, you're a constipational lawyer is what you are. You're full.
Oh my gosh.
Well, you know. But I'm not a lawyer at all, and I claim that, and I'm proud of being able to say that. I do not study law, and I do not study constitutionality, but I do have enough common sense to identify what is constitutional and what is legal. I could do that because I can understand the very basic building blocks of the legal system. I don't understand how these guys can't understand this stuff.
Because of the legal indoctrination in the law school and the legal education industry. We are taught, and again, refer to my article, The Problem with Lawyers and the Constitution. Halfway through the show, I need to move on here. TJ Martinell at the 10th Amendment Center is saying, I love the way he opens this article. In the film Princess Bride, Wesley tells the revenge-bent Indigo Montoya to get used to disappointment. This is also good advice for anyone who puts their faith in the federal government to protect the right to keep and bear arms. The latest decision by the SCOTUS rejecting a bid by gun rights groups to block Trump's unconstitutional bump stock is one more example. So again, they refuse to grant a stay. And again, by doing this, Trump saved gun control advocates the trouble of going state by state trying to get the ban implemented. Again, if a state wants to regulate firearms pursuant to the 10th Amendment, that is exactly what they have the right to do. And this is where people lose their minds. No states have the right to violate our laws either. That's not the point. What does your state constitution say? The system that was set up deliberately to keep the general government limited. That is what federalism is. In a federal system, we have a central government that has few responsibilities and adequate resources. Adequate, not never-ending $22 trillion debt, $4 trillion February, greatest budget deficit we've ever had, or biggest budget yet. This is Republicans. Okay, so great article here. I refer you to the Second Amendment. The 10th Amendment Center. And then there was another article that I wanted to. This is when I was talking about lawyers not getting the Constitution, tying this into the First Amendment issues we had and why Republicans have not repealed that law. I'm not even going to give the name of this lawyer, but the article was just from some blog site I stumbled across. And apparently he wrote a book. It should have been a coloring book. And talking about the First Amendment, and he aptly explains that it applies to the government, the general government, and how they deal with people. And he also aptly says that Employers cannot infringe upon your First Amendment rights because they are not the government. So when they say that they can't infringe upon it, it doesn't apply to them. The employers are not infringing upon your First Amendment right. The government, the general government, is prohibiting this. So he's getting the basics right, but then he analyzes it and says one thing here. He was really doing well at first. Let's get one thing clear. The First Amendment and the Constitution in general, there is a restriction on the government's powers. It is not there to restrain the individual. I'm thinking, bravo, bravo. This is a lawyer that gets it right. He says, this may be a pet peeve of mine. That is the beauty of free speech in America. No matter what the snowflakes keep trying to shove down our throats, free speech applies to all, even if you don't like what the other side is saying. And it is not meant to be used to shut up the other side, even if they're telling you to shut up. Yet someone telling you to shut up does not infringe upon your First Amendment rights. So far, so good. This is where he just absolutely tanks the very next section. Wah, 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 wah. This does not mean there aren't limits to these rights. There are. This is exactly now what Antonin Scalia said in Heller. The right to have a firearm doesn't mean you have the right to take it with you wherever you want. What kind of guns are protected by the Second Amendment? Well, handguns. No, it doesn't protect them. It keeps you from sticking your damn noses where they don't belong. Guns and speech are two instances. So here is where his analysis tanks even further. The basic example is you can't falsely yell fire in a crowded theater, or as Nancy Pelosi would say, wolf in a crowded theater. Gosh, she's dumb. Not because this would be annoying or offensive, but because it would incite panic and cause a dangerous situation. Then he goes on to discuss Schenck versus the United States, where the Supreme Court ruled that the First Amendment does not protect dangerous speech. Once again, this is analogous to Scalia's query of what does the Second Amendment protect. Again, these are restrictions. By implication, they protect these rights, but that does not mean that they have the authority to define or limit them. It is hands off unequivocally. But by calling these rights, they can now say that the rights are subject to reasonable regulations. So again, this is another another article where an attorney tries to inform us and they completely get it wrong. Here is now an article from Firearms Policy Coalition, HR 686. Congress is talking about now regulating ammo. Why can they do this? Because the Second Amendment protects what, Greg? What does the Second Amendment protect? Your right to own a handgun. His mic is mute. He probably went to go get some coffee. Okay, so send Congress a message. They're saying using the contract form below. HR 686 would effectively eliminate the ability to purchase ammunition online by mandating face-to-face transactions. What's more, the bill would require reporting bulk ammunition purchases as well as mandating licensing for ammunition dealers. So this is now a further restriction. They can say, well, we're not banning firearms. We're going to so severely regulate ammunition and report you if you buy what we consider too much. What does bulk purchase mean? Sometimes it's just cheaper to buy a box of 1,000 rounds. Now I want to turn to, sorry about the pause there. I want to turn to what I called here in my notes, a tale of two perspectives. This is an issue of the Supreme Court ruling on the Eighth Amendment as it applies to a state execution case. As we know, the Eighth Amendment prohibits cruel or unusual punishment. like the rest of the Bill of Rights, it's intended to apply to the general government. The first article here, and this is how these people are very clever with regards to the words they use. This was from RT, it's called Question More website, rt.com. The United States Supreme Court declares inmates, I beg your pardon, have no constitutional right to what they say is a painless death. Now, bear in mind, this is a state case that the Supreme Court is ruling on. We have to look at what the state court or the state constitution says about punishment, cruel, unusual, or otherwise. Be that as it may, the article starts out by saying the Supreme Court has declared prisoners have no constitutional right to a painless death, allowing the execution of a convicted murderer to go forward despite his protestations that lethal injections would cause him to suffer. Again, this is why I have an issue with constitutional rights, that term being used. The court reversed a 2018 decision and ruled that death row prisoner Russell Bucklew had his constitutional protections from cruel and unusual punishment did not exempt him from pain, and that he failed to present sufficient evidence that his preferred method of execution, the gas chamber, was less painful or that it could be readily implemented. The Eighth Amendment does not guarantee a prisoner a painless death, Justice Neil Gorsuch wrote in the court's majority opinion, something that, of course, isn't guaranteed to many people, including most victims of capital crimes. The court was split along party lines, with 5 conservatives backing the ruling and 4 liberals dissenting. Now, here's the thing. Again, Neil Gorsuch was considered to be, at the time of his nomination, a constitutional conservative along the lines of Antonin Scalia. And during his nomination acceptance speech, I was off the couch yelling, "No!" He said it is the job, the role of the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, to defend liberties across the nation. No, it is not. Gorsuch and the other conservative justice were unduly dismissive in assuming Bucklew's appeals, and that were meant to be a delaying tactic, according to Justice Sonia Sotomayor and her dissenting opinion. While the court stayed the execution in 2018, 2 justices have retired and replaced with Trump appointees Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. Bucklew was convicted of killing Mike Myers, the live-in boyfriend of his ex-girlfriend, kidnapping and raping his ex-girlfriend, and shooting, her younger son, and wounding a police officer. So let me now share the slate's perspective here and see if we can determine a little bit of a skew here on what they're trying to accomplish. Again, one is coming from the perspective that the death penalty is acceptable, the other is that they are not. And you decide for yourself. It's actually for the state to determine on their own. That being said, I do have an issue with government executing people, and it's a really complicated scenario. I know there are times when it is absolutely necessary, but we also know there are times when 20, 30 years later, people have been completely exonerated. Once they're dead, you can't rectify that. Anyway, that's a topic for another show. But this is what the slate, a left-leaning, that's an understatement, organization describes this as the Supreme Court's conservative just legalized torture. In an appalling death penalty opinion, Neil Gorsuch just overturned 60 years of precedent. And here's how they explain this. On Monday, 5 justices of the Supreme Court authorized Missouri to torture a man to death. In the process, they appear to have overruled decades of Eighth Amendment precedents in a quest to let states impose barbaric punishment, including excruciating executions on prisoners. The court's conservative majority has developed a once fringed view into the law of the land, imperiling dozens of decisions protecting the rights of death row inmates as well as juvenile offenders. Now, let me get back to Bucklew's claims here. He said that the chemicals used in the lethal injection because of a medical condition he had would cause him pain. So, be that as it may, here's just an interesting example of how two different organizations address this issue. Jeff, you've been very silent. Would you like to weigh in at all? Okay. Junk
He's
Bond.
even more silent than silent, huh?
That's kind of weird. Hey, Junk Bond, let's wrap up the show. I have an article here. Our good friend James Bovard wrote this one. I don't know if you had a chance to see it, but you're going to be able to weigh in with a lot of the stuff he says here. And this is called Truth is an Outlaw in Washington. Now, he wrote this. I knew you'd love this. And because you were staying on today, I thought I've got to squeeze this in. So the article was written in November before the Mueller investigation was completed. But what he's talking about here is the perjury trap that Trump was facing. As you'll recall, they were trying to set up an interview or interrogation with Donald Trump. And fortunately, he did not do that. I would advise anybody, if the FBI wants to speak to you, no, you say nothing. We have people like what was it, Michelle Lerner? Or was it Lois Lerner? I think, or from the IRS. She got to go before Congress and just take the fifth. You have every right not to speak to these people, because here's what they say here: federal agents have a right to lie to you and put you in prison if you lie to them. Going back to what he says is Trump's perjury trap, is they have something called the FBI Form 302. I'm sure you're familiar with that, Junk Bond. And this is how the FBI record or defines reality and the truth. The FBI rarely records interviews and instead relies on written summaries, again, Form 302, which are widely held.
FD 302.
Yep. Widely held up in courts as credible evidence of conversations. In a sane world, we would call that hearsay, but that rule has been hollowed out by judges over time. Trump's danger was compounded by federal agents because, as I said, they have a right to lie to you and put you in prison if you lie to them. Any citizen who makes a single word utterance to a federal agent faces up to 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. Federal false statement law conveys so much power that, according to the Solicitor General Seth Waxman, it could allow federal agents to escalate completely innocent conduct into a felony. Now, we talk about politicians when, he just misspoke. You misspoke to the FBI or misspeak to the FBI, you're looking at federal prison. One federal judge condemned the law for encouraging inquisition as a method of criminal investigation. Now, that really stuck out with me because I remember when I started studying criminal law in my years as an undergrad, even, and we learned that what we have is the accusatorial as opposed to the inquisition system of criminal justice, where you are accused, you are not questioned until they find out that you did something wrong. Like, say, I don't know, if you're a commercial truck driver and you subject to inspection, they're going to keep digging till they find something wrong. The FBI can question you, and if you contradict anything, even inadvertently, they've got you. My advice, again, say nothing if they want to talk to you. Ruth Bader Ginsburg dissented in a 1998 Supreme Court decision upholding this law, concluded that the law may result in government generation of a crime when the underlying suspected wrongdoing is or has become unpunishable. She's completely right there. Power is truth. We don't have time to go through the whole article, but what they also say here is inside the Beltway, plausible deniability. Greg, that was a little phrase that you and your buddies came up with, right? Is close enough for the government work to truth. Politicians get away with lies in part because Americans are taught that anyone who disbelieves the government must be crazy. The same view that the KGB took of Soviet dissidents in the 1970s. And here he gets into a little bit of some of these incidents that I think you'll be able to expound upon here. He says this prejudice was canonized in the work of former communist and Ivy League professor Richard Hofstadter's paranoid style in American politics. Top-ranking government officials exploited that notion to help deceive Americans into submissions. This is right up your alley. At the time of the Gulf of Tonkin Institute, excuse me, I know.
You need a war? Go ahead, go to the Gulf of Tonkin. We'll set it up for you.
Defense Secretary Robert McNamara declared it is inconceivable that anyone even remotely familiar with our society and system of government could suspect the existence of conspiracy to take the nation to war on false pretenses. Junk Bond, run with that one. Have we ever, or would we ever do that?
You want the long answer or the short? How much time we have left on this show here today? I mean, come on.
We've got about 10 minutes. I want the 10 minutes back that Jeff took away from me the other day. He shut us off. He shut me down. I think you guys started the hour early. You said, man, I cannot do 2 hours solid with all you clowns. I'm shutting this show down now. Also, the books.
Yeah, we're gonna pull the ringmaster out of the 3-ring circus and shut this doggone circus down.
Yeah, but give us a lowdown on Gulf of Tonkin.
Oh my gosh. So, this is incredible. And I'd like to really, I'd like to kind of set it up because it starts back with Lyndon Johnson, right? And when you have someone who's not the most honest and straightforward person up front, then you can expect the rest of what you're going to get from them is not necessarily going to be honest and straightforward. Now, and just so people understand, this is not, and I'm going to say this is not the first time that Americans have been sold a bill of goods that doesn't add up to a hill of beans. I'm just going to put it that way. This went back, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution actually allowed President Johnson to take all necessary measures. Let me get the exact wording here. Hold on. How do you take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack
Did we lose you?
I got some audio playing over top of me. I can't hear anything.
Okay. Well, I'm going to continue with this article.
I'm sorry.
Paul. Okay, that's fine.
Wait, it's gone.
Okay, go ahead.
I don't know what happened. Anyway, it said that Lyndon Johnson could take all necessary action against any aggressiveness. And it was supposed to be the USS Maddox that had a U.S. naval destroyer that was stationed off the coast in Vietnam was attacked. So, but really, there was not. It didn't happen that way. Again, it was a staging of our own making that made it seem like problems had occurred, and that we were being fired upon by the North Vietnamese and possibly Chinese boats at the time, right? It wasn't the case. It didn't happen. And this led us into a full-blown war and going into Vietnam. Now, the war had started like 10 years before, right? It was French Indochina at the time. And we helped the French take down the legitimate government. And long story short, this whole lie comes out because what did we need? Well, we of course wanted to stop communism based on the Truman Doctrine, right? We want to make sure that communism didn't spread anywhere else in the world because communism bad. Oligarchy's bad. Remember that. Oligarchy's bad, Suzanne. Don't ever forget that. Monarchy's bad, except for England. Monarchy's bad, except for Monaco. You get the picture. So anytime there's any type of oligarchical government in place, we had told the world that we're going to go out and fight it. And our delve into French Indochina turned out to be a faux stop the communist thing because communism eventually took over. We didn't fix anything according to our standards, but we did help invite the North Vietnamese in by completely destroying everything that was there and putting a half-hearted effort into what we did. We shouldn't have been there in the first place, other than we were protecting U.S. big business interest in Vietnam. And we didn't want that to fall in the hands of the communists because that would have impacted our great and glorious economy to extents that we would not be able to ever recover from, I believe was the storyline.
Yeah, we'll have to go more into that. I have a book, A Century of Warfare, that covers all the lives.
Yeah, it was the rubber industry.
Yeah.
Right. We could not afford to lose the rubber for our vehicles. Otherwise, we'd lose our American freedom because we drove all over the place and we needed rubber for, just about everything in the world. And then we turned that into other products other than tires. But that's why you only have like 4 or 5 major tire companies in the United States today, folks. That's why you can't just go out and, when you're graduating high school, can't say, I think I'm going to start a tire company today for automobiles. That's what I want to do. You're completely regulated out of work, right?
And as I started the show earlier too, talking about yesterday, also about the UNESCO and how with Agenda 20, Agenda 1, Agenda 30, and they're the ones.
2030, yeah, 2030 is the UN goal of having the one world government. That's their goal date, 2030. So look for it, folks.
Yes,
coming to a world near you.
What I had said earlier also about our government here, the bigger it gets, the more people it has to control, the more draconian the laws are going to be. We see this
absolutely
with the European Union and why we have Brexit. Watch the movie Brexit and see. I even had a friend of mine tell me that she went to England and asked how much meat would weigh translated into or converted into the American as opposed to metric measurements. And she said, we're prohibited from the European Union rules coming from Brussels to tell you that. So you see that this is going to be, we're going to see more lies. Going back to this article, it says big government, and this is what I said yesterday, going back to UNESCO, our own government, the European government here. Big government requires big lies, and not just about wars, but across the board. The more powerful centralized administration becomes, the more abuses it commits, the more lies it must tell. The government has become addicted to the growth of its own revenue and power. Ironically, we see now distrust of government is often portrayed as dangerous, more dangerous than the government power itself. I refer to Think Progress's calling Michael Bolden from the 10th Amendment Center an extremist merely because he advocates the running of this country, this government, in a manner in which it was consented to. That is what the Marxists call an extremist. This new Green Deal crap, that's not extreme according to them. That's what they consider necessary. This is a really, really good article. I encourage people to find it. Again, he says distrust of government is more dangerous than the government itself. Again, these people are called extremists. We're called dangerous. We are the ones that are being watched because we want the government to have a system of law and order and police themselves, and we are not seeing this. I love how he concludes this article. The biggest whopper in Washington nowadays is the assumption that the government and the political class will automatically be trustworthy once the Trump era ends. Even if Trump is toppled by impeachment, there will still be 1,000 precedents of federal cover-ups and duplicity, and neither political party nor the bureaucracy has shown any itch to cease hornswoggling of the American people. We know we have the government, we have the tech industry, we have the media, the education industry, all against us. It's a matter of time. Sometimes I just feel like we've already lost, but I am just compelled to try and educate people and keep them understanding the reasons why we have to stop looking, for instance, to the Supreme Court for determining what we can and cannot do. That is not consent of the government, consent of the governed. That is not a representative or Republican form of government that was planned. Anyway, this hour went way too fast. Junk Bond, I want to thank you for joining me today. That was a lot of fun. And we will be back hopefully this week. And yeah, we've got a lot more stuff. I've got a ton of great articles that I think everybody's really going to enjoy. So I'm Suzanne Sherman on behalf of Greg Jump on Carpenter, Booger, who was with us in the first hour, and our producer, very silent today, Jeff Johnson.
Can I do a closing note for Jeff?
Yes.
CIA Director William Casey. We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false.
Yep. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. God bless you.